You step out onto a city sidewalk, and the air smells like coal smoke, fresh asphalt, and somebody's cigarette. A car horn blares behind you, a newsboy is shouting about the latest scandal downtown, and somewhere behind a nondescript brick wall, a jazz band is warming up for a party that technically isn't supposed to be happening at all. Welcome to America, 1926. 6 years into a nationwide ban on alcohol, and somehow, the party had never been louder. Prohibition was supposed to sober the country up. Instead, it built an entire underground economy, and by the mid-1920s, that economy wasn't scrappy or improvised anymore. It was mature. It had infrastructure. Speakeasies weren't just hidden rooms with a bottle under the counter, they were full-blown institutions, some of them dressed up nicer than the legal bars they replaced. You needed a password, sometimes a specific knock, sometimes a face the doorman recognized. Behind that door, though, it was a different world entirely. Bribes moved through police precincts like a second currency. Beat cops looked the other way, judges looked the other way, and in some cities, entire departments were basically on the payroll of bootleggers. Enforcement, on paper, was the law of the land. In practice, it was a formality that money could quietly erase. And once you were inside, what were people actually doing? Dancing, mostly, and dancing hard. The Charleston had taken over the country by storm, all knees and heels and flailing arms, a dance that looked like barely controlled chaos and took real skill to pull off well. Right behind it came the Lindy Hop, born out of Harlem, full of energy and improvisation, the kind of dance that turned a crowded speakeasy floor into something electric. These weren't just party trends, they were symbols of a generation cutting loose from the buttoned-up expectations of their parents, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The government had outlawed the drink, and in response, an entire culture of secrecy, music, and rebellion had bloomed in its place. But if speakeasies represented the country's nightlife, it was the automobile that was quietly rewriting everyday life during the daytime hours too. Henry Ford had already changed everything with the Model T. Before Ford, a car was a rich man's toy. After Ford figured out how to mass-produce them on a moving assembly line, a car became something a working-class family could actually save up for and own. And once regular families had cars, everything around them had to change to keep up. Roads that used to be dirt and gravel started getting paved over in asphalt, mile after mile, because horse and buggy paths simply couldn't handle a growing river of automobiles. Gas stations started popping up on street corners and out along country roads, a completely new kind of business that hadn't existed a generation earlier. Cities, meanwhile, were scrambling to catch up with all this new traffic. Nobody had really needed stop signs when the fastest thing on the road was a horse. Now, with more and more cars crowding into intersections, cities began painting traffic lanes onto their streets, posting speed limits, and installing some of the very first traffic signals in American history. Traffic jams, believe it or not, were already a real complaint by the mid-1920s. The automobile hadn't just given people a new way to get around, it had forced an entire redesign of the American landscape, one intersection at a time. Now, while all of this was unfolding out on the streets, something quieter but just as powerful was happening inside American living rooms. The radio was becoming a fixture of everyday life. By 1926, roughly half of all households in the country owned one, a number that would have seemed almost unbelievable just a few years earlier. For the first time in history, families scattered across thousands of miles, farmers in Nebraska, factory workers in Pittsburgh, shopkeepers in Georgia, could all tune in and hear the exact same broadcast at the exact same moment. A boxing match, a musical performance, a piece of breaking news. The radio was quietly stitching together a national identity out of what had always been a patchwork of isolated regional experiences. You didn't have to live in a big city to feel connected to what was happening in one. And if radio was pulling the country together through sound, the movies were doing it through spectacle. On any given week, somewhere around 50 million Americans walked into a movie theater. 50 million, in a country whose entire population was only around 115 million at the time. Think about that ratio for a second. Going to the pictures wasn't a rare treat, it was a weekly habit, almost a civic ritual. And these weren't small screening rooms either. Movie palaces of the era were built to feel like temples, with towering ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and rows upon rows of plush seating, because seeing a film wasn't just about the story, it was about the experience of stepping into another world for an hour or two. And on those screens, for the very first time, America was minting its own homegrown celebrities on a massive scale. Rudolph Valentino, with his brooding good looks, turned into a national heartthrob almost overnight. Clara Bow became the face of the flapper generation itself, so associated with youthful rebellion and charisma that people just started calling her it, as in, she simply had it. Douglas Fairbanks swung across the screen as one of the country's first action stars, all swagger and swordplay. These weren't just actors. They were the first true national pop culture icons America had ever produced, famous not just in their hometowns but from coast to coast, all because of this new medium beaming their faces into movie palaces in every city and small town in the country. Of course, not everyone stayed rooted in one place to enjoy all this. Travel itself was going through its own quiet transformation. Commercial aviation existed in 1926, but calling it comfortable would be generous. Early passenger flights were loud, unpressurized, bumpy affairs, closer to riding inside a metal drum with wings than anything resembling modern air travel. It was thrilling, sure, and it captured the public imagination, but it wasn't yet how most people actually got from one place to another. That honor still belonged to the railroads. If you wanted to travel any real distance in comfort, the train was still the gold standard. Sleeper cars, dining cars with white tablecloths, porters attending to every need, the whole experience was designed around leisure and status as much as simple transportation. Train travel in the 1920s wasn't just functional, it was aspirational, a way of showing that you had both the means and the time to travel well. And all of this activity, the cars, the radios, the movie palaces, the trains, was unfolding against the backdrop of cities that were quite literally reaching for the sky. Steel frame construction had unlocked a new kind of urban ambition, and skyscrapers began stretching higher and higher into the skyline, changing the silhouette of American cities forever. Downtown districts weren't just wider anymore, they were vertical, stacking offices and ambition dozens of stories into the air. Down at street level, shopping itself was becoming something closer to entertainment. Department stores like Macy's and Marshall Field's had transformed retail into a full sensory experience, with elaborate window displays, multiple floors of goods, and an atmosphere designed to make browsing feel like a leisure activity in its own right, not just a chore. For the growing American middle class, a Saturday afternoon might mean wandering through one of these grand stores, admiring the latest fashions, and then, if the weather cooperated, heading out to the beach for the rest of the day. Leisure time itself was becoming something more Americans could actually expect and plan around, not just a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Step back and look at the whole picture, and 1926 starts to feel like a country caught in the middle of a sprint. Prohibition had backfired into a golden age of underground nightlife. The automobile was reshaping the physical landscape beneath everyone's feet. Radio and film were, for the very first time, giving the entire nation a shared cultural language. And cities were literally growing upward and outward to keep pace with all of it. It was a country figuring out, in real time, what modern life was even supposed to look like. And in a lot of ways, the blueprint they were drawing back then, the cars, the media, the retail experience, the pursuit of leisure, is still recognizable in the world we live in today. 100 years later, the details have changed. But the underlying rhythm of American life? That started right here.